So the project Nature's Empire came out of one of those sort of chance meetings where 4 people were together in the right place at the right time. So in 2017, I was asked to investigate our holdings of Indian specimens in preparation for a visit by Dr. Jayanta Sengupta from the Victoria Memorial Hall in Kolkata. And he was accompanied by Andrew and Nandini. And out of that, the project, it really did just snowball. It focuses on the Indian natural sciences holdings at both organisations. For the Victoria Memorial Hall, it's very, very similar to some of the wonderful images that Isabel was showing earlier. Don't worry, Isabel, I'm also sneaking a few animals into my talk as well. And with his collection of drawings, we have found matches to works at the Linnean Society, also the Royal Collection, and pretty much all of them have matches at the British Library. That was one of my lockdown projects, was trying to uncover some of the stories behind his collection of drawings. So this talk today focuses very much on Ram's collections. Let me see if my slides aren't advancing, and I'm not quite sure why. Oh, there we go. So Ram has about 3,500 specimens, photographs and drawings that have Indian origins. The majority of them are birds and insects, but there's also a few mammals and a few reptiles as well. We have a collection of mosses from the Arbor expedition, which was a 1911 punitive mission where scientific staff accompanied the military. Some of these moss specimens are likely to be syntypes, with comparative holdings both at the Natural History Museum in London and also Kolkata Botanic Gardens, I believe. We also have some photographic records. Hang on a second. So the photograph you can see there is a record of the 1864 cyclone, and we've got a series of photographs of massive trees that fell during that incident. We also have a number of botanical prints. The one you can see in the top right there, we believe has links to Roxburgh, but we haven't really put much research into those yet. So this talk focuses specifically on Ram's works of art on paper, which sit within the Cresswell collection. Born in London, Richard Cresswell spent most of his life in Devon. Like so many, he suffered from poor health and he took up a curacy at Salcombe Regis on the coast. Later, he took on and taught private pupils. He had a passion for algae, particularly seaweeds, but also microscopic algae. We've got long accounts of his exploration of puddles, and the drawings in the bottom left there are from some of those. He and his wife were both keen botanists, and his collection not only includes plant specimens collected by himself and by his daughters, drawings of fungi that the family collected together, but also drawings of orchids. So the picture in the top left there, we believe is either by his sister Sarah of a British orchid or one of his daughters. And interestingly, the pictures of orchids all seem to correspond to almost illuminated manuscript style drawings, like the picture in the center there. But of his collection, there are some botanical drawings that are of exceptional quality, and the Egyptian lotus there is one of them. Whilst his family's drawings are very beautiful, they are very definitely amateur works, whereas this set of much finer drawings really are exceptional. So this shows some of that collection. In 2013, we underwent a collections review. So we singled out areas of the collection where we felt we ought to be able to find out more. And to look at all of our botanical drawings, we employed Martin Ricks, formerly of Kew. And of all of our holdings, he singled out these 88 works in Cresswell's collection of being of particular importance. He told us they were likely by Indian artists at the request of European scientists, and that they were very much East India Company school style. The majority of these works are of plants, with a few exceptions. So there are 4 animals, including the partially finished one in the bottom right-hand corner. But also a few of them depict aspects of Indian life. A couple of them are palanquins, a few of them are people. But the majority of these 88 works look a lot like this one in terms of composition. So this is Golden Senna. It's a very, very fine painting. There's a large section of a plant in the middle, and underneath that are details of the flowers, fruits, and seed heads. And that's common across most of this collection of 88. But also on each work is a number, in this case 51, and an identification. We don't know whose hand that is. If anybody recognises it, I'd be very grateful if you would contact me, please. So it doesn't look like the hand of Miss Aviolay, who was a curator at RAM who compiled all of Cresswell's fungal drawings. Her handwriting was quite elaborate, unlike this. But we do get a little bit of a clue as to the date of the writing. So on the bottom of this work, it says Dilenia, apparently Dilenia indica Linnaeus, but the colour of the petals is wrong. So that refers to the picture that's on the left-hand side there, where the petals are dark, dark grey or black. However, we managed to get a grant from the Arts Council through their PRISM strand to have all 88 works conserved. And after conservation, the work looked quite different. So on the right-hand side, the lead white paint that had oxidized over the time and blackened has been restored to its original color and a much more stable state. So this suggests that the identification was not done at the time the paintings were commissioned, because at that time, the flowers would have been white as they should be. So it must have been done quite some time after, when the paint had had time to oxidize. So in 2016, having had all of the works conserved, this enabled us to put half of the collection on display at RAM. Martin Ricks kindly prepared all the content for us. And you can see from the pictures of the show, the extreme quality of these paintings meant that they could be blown up floor to ceiling and still look absolutely stunning on these banners. The exhibition was centered around the plant's use in Ayurvedic medicine, modern medicine, as well as their use in cooking and also for timber. So Martin noticed that actually most of the plants have some use in Ayurvedic medicine. The ones pictured here are still of interest for treating serious diseases today. So they're being investigated as cures for cancer, diabetes. The wireweed in the center there is useful treating infections in patients with HIV or AIDS. But even after all of Martin's work, there were still some questions that remained. Why were they made? Who commissioned them, and who painted them? So Martin had already compared the drawings at RAM to Roxburgh's drawings. So for Roxburgh, there are 2 sets of these, one at Kolkata Botanic Gardens and the other at Kew. So the pictures here show the butterfly pea. The one on the left there is the one at RAM, and the one at the right, I think that's a picture of the one at Kew. So whilst very similar in style, they both have detailed drawings of the flowers and the reproductive parts of the plants. They're clearly not identical copies. So we didn't have the same level of success there as we had matching the drawings at the Victoria Memorial Hall to the holdings at the British Library, for example. So Roxburgh's drawings were produced because the East India Company needed them to help exploit India's natural resources. That's why they were so detailed and included all aspects of the plants. So our drawings are again sufficiently detailed to allow that, but we don't know for certain that they were created with purely botanical objectives in mind. So if it wasn't Roxburgh who commissioned them, who was it? So just before the exhibition opened, Henry Nolte kindly visited RAM. The conditions weren't ideal because the works were all stacked ready for install, so he didn't get a particularly good look at any of them. Henry suggested that Henry Creighton may have commissioned the works that we have. Henry Creighton is best known for his paintings of the ruins at Gower. He was superintendent at an indigo factory. Interestingly, indigo is a plant that isn't reflected in any of the drawings in our collection. And he's also known to have sent plant specimens to Roxburgh at the Calcutta Botanic Gardens. So how are the two connected? Well, Richard Cresswell married Frances Creighton. She was born in India to Robert Creighton, who was a judge. And we have found a very tentative link between Robert and Henry. I haven't found anything definitive. Again, if anybody knows otherwise, I'd be very grateful if you could let me know. So it's a lovely story that potentially Henry Creighton passed these drawings down through his family, and Frances then passed them through Richard's family. But it is just that, it is a story. We don't have any proof that that is the case. But thankfully there was one mystery that some additional work did manage to solve. So the second question of who painted these beautiful drawings. So without a doubt, we knew that they were Indian artists under the supervision of European botanists. And we know that it's rare for names of artists to be recorded, but 17 of our drawings have attributions on the reverse. So on the top there, that's actually Bengali script, which at the time I didn't know, with an English transliteration underneath. So we read it as Sak or Jack, joy in a day, Babanidas and Ramdas. Now at the time in 2013, Google wasn't remotely helpful. We couldn't match any of those names to holdings that weren't our own. But then that visit from Jayanta, Nandini and Andrew turned the tables. So they were being given a tour of RAM, and I basically kidnapped them and asked them to have a look at these drawings. And within 36 hours, Nandini came back to us saying that the works were attributed to 3 of the best known Indian artists of that time. So with hindsight, I probably should have made the connection to Ramdas, but without the other 2, that was quite a difficult connection to make at the time, particularly before wonderful exhibitions such as Forgotten Masters. The other is Bhawani Das. Now this is the part of the talk that I normally leave to Nandini because my pronunciation is poor. If anybody wants any further information on how Nandini traced the names, she'd be more than happy to talk to anyone, but unfortunately she couldn't make it today. And then lastly, Sheikh Zain al-Din. So the Bengali is transcribed as Sak Joiner Day. The title or honorific Sak is an Anglophone corruption of Sheikh. The given name Zain al-Din is vocalized in Arabic, Persian and Urdu as Zainuddin. But in Bengali, it is Joiner Day. And that's how that transliteration of Sak Joiner Day must have come about. So without Nandini's wonderful linguistic skills, RAM would never have made that connection. So who were these artists? Well, we know that Bhawani Das worked for a company surgeon called James Kerr around 1773, and that's from Henry Nolte's research. And that's a connection that I need to follow up further. But this trio of artists is best known for their work for Lady Mary Impey from around about 1777. In her collection, the works that they created were mostly zoological, but a lot of the birds, such as the picture that you see here, are perched on perfect botanical drawings. Lady Impey not only attributed the works to the artist in Persian, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, she also dated them. So you can see from the work on the right, which is ours, there are strong similarities between the two works. So this picture of the silk moth caterpillar, this one doesn't have an attribution on the reverse, but it's entirely plausible that Zain al-Din could have done both of these works, one at the Minneapolis Institute of Art and the other being ours. I think they also both have gold leaf on the little spiracles on the caterpillar. So the only exact copy that we have found of one of these works is actually within Ram's collection. So on the left, you have a very fine quality picture of a South African plant. The one on the right is much poorer quality, but actually the style very closely matches those orchids that I mentioned earlier. So there was a reason for mentioning those orchids. So I surmise that actually either Sarah Cresswell or one of Cresswell's daughters was using these Indian works to copy from. So that's at least one mystery solved as to why we seem to have a duplicate work. The Zain al-Din was also known to work for Sir William and Anna Maria Jones. So this is a picture from the Royal Asiatic Society's collection, and thank you so much to Ed for taking the time to show these to us. So this shows their picture of an elephant apple and ours. So this has been attributed to Zain al-Din from around 1787. So it's quite clear that these three artists had several patrons. But we may never know who our works were made for. So the outliers within the group are actually just as interesting. Now, I've put very little research effort into these. It's next on my list to do. So these really don't seem to fit with the rest of them. But what they all have in common is a beautiful decorative foreground that you can see enlarged beneath. So just as much care has been taken over the tiny plants in the foreground as those in the back. And I'm very much hoping that we may see that style in other paintings and therefore have a clue as to where ours might have originated from. So there's a set of trees. So I think there's the coconut trees, date palms, but then also pictures of Indian life. Some particularly, this lady is particularly beautifully done. All of these also have gold leaf on the works. And my favorite drawing, which is this Shia Ghosh or lynx. So that's a really, really quick sort of romp through the collection that RAM holds. And as I've said, this is very much a sort of ad hoc project for me when I have a little bit of spare time. And if anybody can shed any light on the collection, I would love to hear from you. And equally, if you have any questions for my colleagues, Nandini or Andrew, then I'm very happy to pass those on. If anybody has got any questions after that very quick romp through the collection, I'm very happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Holly. That's a wonderful introduction to the collections at RAM, and once again, some really exquisite and beautiful paintings. I must admit, to my shame, I wasn't aware of the collection at RAM before you and Nandini visited. I was very pleased to learn about it and to see more about it today. And I hope that if others were in this state of darkness that I was in beforehand, that they also enjoy this process of enlightenment. And it is very important that we are able to complete this picture of the distribution of collections of this nature around the world and across the UK, and particularly I think it's quite easy, especially for those of us who do work in London, to have quite a London-centric sort of view of the state of collections in the country. So to know this very important and wondrous collection in Exeter is really magnificent. So thank you, and thank you also for highlighting the work that has been done to identify the Indian artists that you named towards the end. It is really extraordinary to see some of the ingenious solutions to those conundrums. I would never, as you said, we have a Zain al-Din, at least one, in our collection. I would never have come to that conclusion. That's really remarkable. I do would urge people to put in their questions or comments now while we have Holly with us, particularly as it's a rare opportunity to hear about the collections at RAM. And of course, be followed up afterwards. And I suppose it would be even better if somebody could answer some of your questions. This would be the ideal time to do so, and they would have the floor to themselves and a vast audience. But if there aren't any questions or comments now, of course, we can come back for those later if others come up during the course of the afternoon. We actually are running a little bit ahead of schedule. We have a break schedule. Oh, okay, we've got something in the Q&A. And the question is, do you know where Creswell purchased these rare paintings?
No, so that goes back to what I was saying about Henry Creighton. So Henry Nolte suggested that it was possibly Henry Creighton that commissioned them in India. And it is possible that they then passed from him to his son Robert, to his daughter Frances, and she married Richard Creswell. So that is a possibility. We've not found any proof that that is the case. It's a lovely story if it were, but equally, yes, you're right. He could have purchased them at auction, although I don't get the impression he was particularly wealthy, or he could have been given them. He was in communication with a lot of the sort of key naturalists, particularly in the Southwest. So the likes of Philip Henry Goss, Cutler, who was a keen seaweed collector. He could have been given them, he could have purchased them, they could have come down through his family. And I think until we figure out who commissioned them, we're not going to get close to actually knowing the answers to that, unfortunately.
It is remarkable, just as a facet of the intellectual culture of the late 18th, early 19th century. I mean, obviously there is very, the aspect of colonial collecting is obviously central to this collection, and it's a very important part of the research which we're doing across collections in the UK now. I was struck recently just by my own work and coming across the extent to which rural clergymen were involved in natural history research in the late 18th, early 19th century. It sort of was a sort of enlightenment sort of project. I think there was monographs on bees and insects were being produced by the dozen. It was something which I guess so clergymen like Richard Creswell were turning their hands to. We've got Isabel had her hand up, so can we, Isabel, would you like to come in?
Sure. I see that I have exactly the same question as Anne, actually. Sorry. I was wondering if they were on display at the RAM in the museum, or if they're in the back, or if you've got some on display with interpretation.
So there are 3 of them on display at any one time in our permanent galleries. So they are actually just about to change over in January, so that we have one by each of the attributed artists. So at the moment, I think we've got some tamarisk, the silk moth caterpillar, which is my personal favorite, and one other. And like I said, they'll change in January. But in terms of the question about how they're reconserved back to their original color, I can ask our conservator to explain that. It's something about the way they treat the paint. is a different stable state of the paint. So it's not putting it back to how it was originally, but it does go back to the same colour. But Hanlon, if you drop me an email, so I've got your email address, I can ask our conservator to explain that better.
We've just had a question about the questions. The question being, can the questions be made public for all audience members? I'm not sure on the deep technical aspects of that, but I'm more than happy to read the questions out as they come in. I think the ones we've had so far have been read. The second one was just to say a bit more about how the drawings were conserved back to their original colour. We have another question which has come in about, are any plant collecting locations noted in the drawings or locations for the trees in the landscapes you showed?
No, unfortunately not. Apart from the seemingly much later scientific names being added, there's no writing on them whatsoever, apart from the attributions on the back. If I can go, all my slides let me go back. Yeah, so the writing on them just says, so for example, a date tree or a Bodhi tree. There's nothing particularly helpful in terms of tracing locations or hands. It's a mystery.
And Holly, have you answered the question already about are any of these paintings currently on display at the museum in Exeter?
Yeah, so like I said, there's 3 slots for them in our permanent display, and they change over every so often. So they'll next be changing over in January.
Well, thank you again, and thank you to everyone for all your questions. We do have a break coming up. We'll be back in 10 minutes, and you've heard many references to him, but we will shortly be able to hear from the man himself. So I am delighted that Henry Nolte is with us this afternoon, and if we reconvene at past, we will hear Henry on Indian collections at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. Thank you again, Holly.